This video is sponsored by Card Kingdom. If you click on the link in the description below, it'll take you to their store and they'll know I sent you there. Hi everyone, I'm Nitsahone, and it's Friday, so that means it's time for another MTG Top 10. The series where I rank cards based on their historical performance at Magic's highest level of competition. I've done over 340 of these at this point, and that has included looking at every two-color pair as well as some shards and wedges. And today we're going to look at the Temur wedge. Temur is one of the factions on the plane of Tarkir, and it's represented by red, green, and blue. To be eligible for this video, a card had to have a Temur color identity, which means that the card had to have red, green, and blue mana symbols appear somewhere on the card, with no other colored mana symbols on it. This means a card can qualify for this list simply by costing all three Temur colors, but it also means that a monocolored card that has the other two mana symbols in its text box also counts as a Temur card. In this video, we'll talk about the 10 Temur cards that have had the biggest impact on competitive Magic. Before we get started, here's a quick reminder on how I score cards for these videos. A top 8 at a Pro Tour, Players Tour, Mythic Championship, Mythic Invitational, Legacy, or Vintage Championship is worth 2 points, and a top 8 at a Magic Fest or Grand Prix is worth 1 point. Alright, let's get to the list. At number 10, it is Temur Ascendancy. There's a whole cycle of Ascendancies and Khans of Tarkir, one for each of the wedges, and obviously enough, this is the Temur one. A big focus of Temur in the set was on creatures having 4 or more power, so this is obviously on theme. Giving all your creatures haste is nice, especially because if you're running the Ascendancy, a lot of those creatures will have 4 or more power too, which means they'll be able to hit hard right away while also drawing you a card. Temur Ascendancy gained its 1 point in a Temur aggro deck at Grand Prix San Antonio in 2014. At number 9, it is Shaman of the Great Hunt. The Shaman is part of a cycle of monocolored mythic rares that have hybrid abilities which can cost mana of the other two colors of the wedge. Shaman of the Great Hunt, like Temur Ascendancy, is all about creatures having 4 or more power. He has more than 4 power himself, and his activated ability draws you cards for each creature you control with power 4 or greater, and chances are good you'll have creatures with that much power since all of them can gain +1/+1 counters once Shaman of the Hunt is in play. The Shaman gained its points in Naya midrange decks while it was in Standard. At number 8, it is Yasova Dragonclaw, which has the same score as Shaman of the Great Hunt, down to the 2 Grand Prix top 8s. I gave Yasova the edge though, because she finished higher in the top 8s on average. Yasova is part of a cycle of rare Khans of the factions of Tarkir, but in the past, Yasova was the leader of the Temur back then. Fate Reforged was a time travel set where we went back in time after visiting Tarkir in the present. Yasova is a 3-mana 4/2 with Trample that can use hybrid mana to threaten opposing creatures who have lower power than she does. That kind of ability is often not that impressive, but being able to do it every single turn is pretty great since it simultaneously removes a blocker and adds an attacker to your side of the table, and it can result in some pretty serious damage. Yasova Dragonclaw was played in Gruul aggro decks while she was in Standard. At number 7, it is Surak Dragonclaw, the leader of the Temur at the time of Khans of Tarkir. Surak brings a ton of effects to the table. In addition to having great stats as a 5-mana 6/6, Surak also gives your whole board Trample, has Flash, can't be countered, and he makes it so your other creature spells can't be countered either. Flash is great on a creature this size since it is pretty easy to ambush block opposing creatures, since almost all of them will be smaller than Surak. Surak was played in Temur aggro decks while he was in Standard. He has also seen a bit of play in modern Scapeshift decks, but never gained any points in them. At number 6, it is Research and Development, a split card with Temur identity. Most of the cards we've looked at so far on this list have been pretty straightforward, but that's not really the case here. For one thing, the Research half lets you get cards out of your sideboard mid-game and put them into your deck, an effect we don't see a whole lot of. The development side is a little more straightforward, but still a little wacky. Basically, you make your opponent choose between giving you creature tokens or cards 3 times. It was featured in a Temur control deck that top-8'd the Ravnica Block Pro Tour. Research could be used to shuffle in a card from the sideboard like Savage Twister, and then you could search it up for your hand for future use. The development half of the card was probably cast more frequently in block, but the research half did not go unused. It's also been played in Legacy Mono-Blue Omnitail decks in a more complicated manner, to say the least. In those decks, your goal is to play Omniscience and some stupid powerful spells, then cast Enter the Infinite. This particular version of the deck sought to win the game by using Research to shuffle Laboratory Maniac into your deck, which would now consist of 2 cards, the card put back by Enter the Infinite and the Maniac. You could then use draw spells to draw the remaining cards, play the Maniac, and then another card draw spell to win the game. Research and Development has one Legacy top 8 from a mono-blue Omnitail deck where it was used in this somewhat convoluted manner. At number 5, it is Mythos of Aluna. While Khans of Tarkir was a wedge set, so was Ikoria Lair of Behemoths, where the Apex Aluna occupied the Temur colors. Each of those Apexes had a Mythos that was monocolored, but could get upgraded if you paid all 3 colors of mana from that particular wedge. In the case of this Mythos, it goes from just making you a token copy of a permanent on the battlefield to also having that token fight something else, provided it's a creature. That effect is nice because it can be a straight-up removal spell when it needs to be, like if you copy your opponent's best creature and fight it, or it can give you some more serious value by copying the best creature on the board and then killing something smaller. Mythos of Aluna gained all of its points in standard Fires of Invention decks before that deck was banned into oblivion. The Mythos is still in standard now and has at least an outside shot at adding to its score in the future. At number 4 is Temur Charm. Factions and mini sets get a modal cycle of charms or commands, and that was true too in Khans of Tarkir. Typically, charms get their strength out of their flexibility and not so much out of efficiency, and that's definitely true here. The charm has 3 effects that can perform well in the right situation. If you have a creature that is big enough to kill an opposing creature, with the addition of a +1/+1 counter, you can use the first option. If your opponent plays something you just can't let resolve, you can choose the second option, which makes it a hard-to-cast mana leak. And then, if your opponent's board is a bunch of small creatures, the charm can let you ignore them completely while you attack your opponent. While those options are all somewhat situational, having 3 separate situational effects on one card means that you will be able to use it effectively a high percentage of the time. Temur Charm was featured in Temur aggro decks while it was in standard. At number 3, it is Genesis Ultimatum. Each wedge got an ultimatum in Ikoria Lair of Behemoths, and all of them are kind of hard to cast, but do something insane when you can cast them. In the case of Genesis Ultimatum, you get to put all permanents in the top 5 cards of your library directly onto the battlefield, and you draw any cards that aren't permanents in that top 5. That's going to win the game most of the time when you cast it. Temur Ultimatum was a key card in standard and historic Omnath ramp decks. That deck, largely built around Omnath Locus of Creation, had no problem generating the necessary mana to cast the Ultimatum, and it also got around one of the downsides of Genesis Ultimatum. Hitting lands with it doesn't feel very good, but if you have Omnath in play, that's no longer the case, since getting multiple landfall triggers in a single turn gives you a huge effect. Omnath did ultimately get banned out of Standard and Historic, which may not bode well for Genesis Ultimatum. There is a ramp deck in Standard these days called Temur Ultimatum that has a game plan similar to the Omnath deck, minus Omnath, but so far it doesn't have any points from those decks. However, it is still in Standard, and it wouldn't be too surprising for it to gain at least a few more points before it rotates. At number 2, it is Savage Knuckleblade. It can pump itself, gain haste, or return itself to its owner's hand. That last one is useful against removal or board sweepers, while the other 2 are obviously more useful for attacking. This is a very aggressive creature, so it should come as no surprise that it was featured in Temur aggro decks in Standard. It also picked up 1 point in a modern Temur Delver deck. And at number 1, it is Rattleclaw Mystic. This creature is Temur as a result of being able to tap for all 3 Temur colors. It also comes with the additional bonus of Morph, which in this case is no small thing. It's one of very few colored Morph cards with a colorless cost to turn it face up, and that's a big deal here because it generates the 3 Temur colors when it is turned face up. So even if you can't get green, you can still play your Mystic face down and get it later. 2-mana creatures who tap for mana regularly see play in Standard, so it's no surprise that Rattleclaw Mystic follows that pattern. Allowing you to play 4 drops on turn 3 is great. The Mystic was played in a variety of decks while it was in Standard, including Devotion to Green, Gruul Dragons, and Temur aggro. A lot of those decks also ran Death Mist Raptor, and that gave the Mystic some additional value since it could bring the Raptor back from the graveyard when it was turned face up. It hasn't been played since rotating out of Standard, but at 37 points it has a huge lead on the cards on this list that are still seeing play, so for the foreseeable future, I would imagine Rattleclaw Mystic will remain at the top of this list. Well, that does it for this MTG Top 10. If you feel the need to buy any of these Temur cards, you can find direct links to each of them in the Card Kingdom store in the description. If you enjoyed this video, do me a favor and like it and share it so that others can enjoy it too. If you want to make sure you catch future MTG Top 10s, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. And if you need to catch up on the over 340 other MTG Top 10s I've already done, you should see that playlist on your screen now. Thanks for watching.